footage flowing in from social media of the horrifying terror attack in Israel has been tough to watch for even the most hardened journalist, let alone the family members, some of whom have found out their loved ones were murdered after seeing it on social media.
בצרחות, תפתחו את הפייסבוק. אמא לא הצליחה בכלל לפתוח, רעדה בכל הגוף שלה. אני פתחתי מהטלפון שלי, וראיתי זוועה. ראיתי את האסון הכי גדול שאפשר בכלל לדמיין. סבתא שלי על הרצפה בבית שלה, רצוחה בסרטון.
It should have been a situation condemned beyond question or debate. It should have been something we all agreed on. But for some in the media, this attack has not just exposed the depths of depravity humans can sink to, it has revealed an underlying contempt and, in my opinion, a hatred some in the media have for Israel and its people. And we will get to the specifics of that later in the show, because there's lots to unpack here about the media's role in covering this tragedy. Because when you put aside malice, there was also the pure incompetence spilling through to our screens. Everyone by now would have seen the vision of disturbing footage of the pro-Hamas sympathisers in Sydney chanting "F the Jews" and by some accounts "gas the Jews." If you missed it, take a look at this. For our Jewish Australians to be subjected to that at a time when Israel is at war with a group of evil terrorists is unconscionable, and it has humiliated our country on the national stage. The New York Times even pointed out this incident as a mark of shame. And in that piece, Brett Stevens wrote of what he witnessed at the pro-Palestinian rallies. What I saw was giddiness and gloating, as if someone's team had won the World Cup. Hamas had perpetrated the largest single-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and the crowd was euphoric. Similar scenes unfolded across the world. In London, an estimated 5,000 demonstrators gathered near the Israeli embassy and shot off fireworks towards the building. At a rally in the Sydney Opera House in Australia, chants of Free Palestine gave way to the underlying emotion, F the Jews. The New York Post also condemned the Sydney rally and later in the week splashed on similar scenes taking place at Harvard University of all places. This idea that the attack was justified or some sort of resistance was starting to take root, and our incompetent media lapped it up.
I don't think Australians could imagine what life is like in Gaza right now, or before even, but especially right now. Could you give us some kind of sense of it?
Yeah, hello everyone. Actually, we're now on the fourth day in a row of the Israeli attack on Gaza, and every night has been harsher than the night before. There is no place that is safe in Gaza. Every place across the Gaza Strip has been targeted. Every neighborhood that is densely populated has been also targeted.
Now, Waleed just let that guest talk for 2 minutes straight without challenging her assertions in any way. He didn't ask her to state if she accepted that civilians had been slaughtered in Israel, as Hamas sees even the murdered babies as being fair game. He just let her make the case that Israel was bad and Palestine was oppressed. And on 9 News, it was somehow worse. The organiser of that Sydney protest said the disgusting event was bittersweet, adding that she was proud of the Palestinian resistance.
We go now to Asala Sayara, a Palestinian activist who was one of the organisers of the rally last night. Asala, welcome. Last night was quite a night. How is the Palestinian community feeling today?
Hello, Davina. I guess if I want to express how we are feeling in one word, it will be very hard. I would say it's bittersweet. We are feeling a mix of emotions. We are feeling angry. We are feeling saddened with the pain and the suffering that we Palestinians have been facing until this day. A injustice at the hands of the Israeli occupation. But on the other hand, we are also feeling proud of the resilience and the resistance of the Palestinian people.
And that dopey news anchor was just smiling and nodding alongside a guest who provided a rationale for why she organised a rally which ended in people yelling F the Jews. Think about how disgusting that is, to conduct an uncritical interview on that topic. The woman said she was very proud of Palestine in that interview, and the host just sat there like an idiot, letting the propaganda spread through the airwaves. What does that guest mean by resistance? Does she think the terror attack was appropriate resistance? Why are so many of these journalists too stupid to ask the clear question, or so gripped with ideological possession that it doesn't even occur to them? Well, let's bring in tonight's panel, and joining me is Sky News host Caleb Bond and the media writer for The Australian, Sophie Elsworth. Caleb, let's start with you. What was your verdict on the media coverage?
Look, I think on the whole, the media coverage, particularly at this channel, has been appropriate. But when you see what we've just seen, particularly that interview on Channel 9, which was basically just an unfettered opportunity to run Hamas talking points, how do you let that happen? I mean, the first thing you learn in journalism, and it doesn't matter whether you've done a cadetship or you went to university and got your degree that you may as well wipe your bottom with, they tell you must be critical. It's the number one thing in journalism. You must be critical.
The host was almost encouraging.
I know.
This sympathetic.
If you cannot conduct an interview through a critical lens at such an important time, you ought to give up your journalism card. And I don't care who you're interviewing. This is one of the biggest events in the world in the last decade, and it needs to be treated with question. You can't just let someone come on who's organised a rally that fundamentally sympathises with a terrorist organisation. And that's the context here, is that if you went to that rally in Sydney on Monday night, or you went to the rally in Melbourne on Tuesday night, it wasn't just about free Palestine. What brought all of this on was Hamas attacking innocent people in Israel. And if that is your reason to come out and march, then you are a terrorist sympathiser. You only put a terrorist sympathiser on television if you're going to challenge them, not just let them say whatever they want.
Yeah, Sophie, let's bring you in. What are your thoughts on the issue?
Some really good points there, Jack, by Caleb, but that's absolutely the case. When you are interviewing people, you need to come from all angles. You can't just give them a free run, and this appeared to be a free run. What happened outside the Opera House the other night was pretty disgraceful stuff, Jack, and the host on 9 News should have put those questions to that woman, asking her about the conduct that occurred there, about the screaming, those obscene chants, and whether or not this is acceptable in Australia. And there's all this talk at the moment that Australia is going to be viewed around the world as a horrible place if the voice referendum fails. Well, I think we should be putting that aside and looking at the conduct that occurred at the front of the Sydney Opera House the other night, those words that were uttered, screamed, in fact, and whether or not this sort of behaviour is acceptable. And journalists need to be asking tough questions. And whoever was putting this interview on the television at Channel 9 should have prepared the reporter. The reporter should have been across the issue and asked hard questions.
Well said. Well, staying on Israel, you'll notice that I kept the ABC out of the first editorial. Now, that's not because our national broadcaster is beyond reproach on this issue. Far from it. We needed to separate the ABC because of some egregious examples of biased and inappropriate reporting on this conflict. The first example is political reporter Noor Haydar. The Daily Mail reports that ABC reporter Noor Haydar is under fire for social media posts about Israel-Palestine conflict. Does she work at the ABC or Al Jazeera? An ABC political reporter has been accused of breaching the national broadcaster's strict impartiality guidelines after sharing controversial tweets about the conflict in Israel and surrounding fallout in Australia. Now, for context, she retweeted this after the alleged Gas the Jews rally. How is it possible that Palestinians in Australia are being policed for their language, protests, grief, called animals, accused of supporting terrorism, framed as instigators, and an Australian Jewish organisation openly calls for genocide, the reposted tweet says. Now, really? That's your take? The protesters are now the victims. There is something really rotten at the ABC if this woman is allowed back on air. And the story doesn't end there. The ABC also ran into strife with ABC Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner. getting in a fight with the press pack in Israel and using crude language in a group chat to talk down a key detail. Sophie Elsworth exclusively reported ABC Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner labels stories about babies being beheaded in Israel BS. The ABC's Middle Eastern correspondent Tom Joyner has labelled reports about babies being beheaded by Hamas terrorists in Israel BS during a fiery exchange in a WhatsApp group with hundreds of international journalists and broadcasters. Now, as Sophie reports, the group chat, which had many journalists in it, turned on Joyner and asked him to retract the comments. But it shows how these ABC reporters think about the issue. The semantics of whether a child was beheaded or simply blasted to death by gunfire is an irrelevant distinction. Either way, it is disgusting. And at the time he made those comments, it was well established that many, many children had been murdered. We, of course, now know that the beheading reports have been verified. But this ABC journalist wanted to kill off that narrative before he was smacked down by his peers. It is another example of big ego journalist personalities at the ABC calling the shots with no editorial oversight. Now, Sophie, I want to go back to you because this was your exclusive. Well done. You've been on fire lately. Tell me about this story, how you came across it, why you thought it was important.
Well, Jack, it is important because Tom Joyner is the Middle East correspondent for the ABC, the taxpayer-funded broadcaster that all Australians pay for. These messages were obviously given to me showing what his remarks were to a WhatsApp chat group with hundreds, I'm told possibly 600 broadcasters from across the world who are working on this unfolding situation in Israel. For Tom Joyner to make those remarks, pretty offensive remarks, to a WhatsApp group, he was heavily condemned by the group. I put questions to the ABC about whether or not his remarks were appropriate. Was he being reprimanded? And when we're going to air, Jack, no action's been taken. The ABC to this point have not made any comment. And I've tried to reach Tom Joyner and haven't heard a word from him. This is really serious stuff, Jack, when the Middle Eastern correspondent is sharing his views on this, and they're going all around to this massive WhatsApp group. And a lot of the reporters on the ground were really annoyed about this, and they said that in that chat, which I exposed. So I think the ABC need to do something about this.
It's very disturbing they haven't said anything, but not too surprising. I also want to touch on this story where in the UK, the BBC is refusing to call Hamas a terrorist organisation. Now, Talk TV heard from a BBC reporter who actually quit over the scandal. Have a listen.
But you've decided, because of the actions of or inaction, I suppose, of the organisation more generally, not to call Hamas terrorists, that the time has come for you to go. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have morals and I stick by them. I think the words justified and unjustified have been thrown around a lot since the weekend. And I think the BBC's refusal to use the correct terminology is unjustified. Words are quite literally fundamental to the English language. They impact how we think, how we react, how we act. They have influence. The phrase freedom fighter distracts from the reality of terrorism. To those easily influenced, it implies what is not. These people aren't freedom fighters. They are not, as John Simpson refers to them, as gunmen. They are terrorists. And there are probably people watching who will be thinking, this boy, my God, has thrown it all away because of some words. But terminology, words, when neglected, have the power to fuel hate. They have the power to put fuel on the fire.
Now, Caleb, I think it's worth pointing out that the British government designates Hamas as a terrorist group. The Australian government designates them as a terrorist group. Who are these journalists at the BBC that think they can supersede that designation and just call them freedom fighters?
Well, it's irresponsible because it helps stoke this anti-Semitic underbelly that we have seen very clearly in this country this week. But what is behind all of this is a kind of Western self-loathing because, of course, Jews represent Israel and Israel represents the oppression of people in the Middle East to these people. And so they hate anything something that represents the power of the West, and Israel is a part of that. And so in a perverse kind of way, they feel that if they lend support to Hamas or they lend support to Palestine, which of course is just code for anti-Semitism, it will help decrease the power of the West. The irony of that is that most of these people who carry on about it, and you saw during the week people brandishing signs saying queers for Palestine, would not last 5 minutes under Hamas rule. It's this kind of disgusting self-loathing that would not only cost them their lives, but the lives of most people in the West. I mean, we are the infidels, right? It's not just the Jews they've got beef with, Hamas. They've got beef with anyone who's not a Muslim. So to think that by appeasing them or working for their cause in any way is good for the world is utterly wrong, and it whips up exactly the scenes we saw in front of the Opera House this week. It's just supremely irresponsible and unsafe.